Welcome to Caserta's Data Intelligence Series. In this series, we talk about what it takes to go from a good data and analytics leader to a great one. We'll share with you the tools and methodologies you need to build better, faster, and more robust, as well as strategies and frameworks to generate more revenue and grow your business. Featuring some very special guests and experts to inspire you and give you advice and direction on your data journey. And now, introducing your host, Caserta Data and Analytics Evangelist and VP Marketing, Remy Rosenbaum.
Hi, and welcome to the sixth and final episode in our Operationalizing Data Governance series. Today, we are going to talk about how to establish a data organization. And to answer this, we have two excellent presenters that I've brought on today. I'm proud to say that we have Joe Caserta, our founding CEO. Joe is an internationally recognized public figure, speaker, entrepreneur, technologist, and our founder. Joe has co-authored the best-selling book, The Data Warehouse ETL Toolkit, which is still a gold standard of data warehousing till today. Next, we have Aileen Blast, who is a senior data strategist with Caserta. As a seasoned data strategist, Aileen has spent much of her career collaborating with business leaders to develop data strategies that support business objectives. Her leadership has helped multiple clients leverage their existing data investments to solve complex problems and usher in new levels of data competency and literacy across the organizations she supports. And now a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get started. For those of you who don't already know, Caserta is a data and analytics consulting firm headquartered in New York. We help good data analytics leaders who know the importance of being data-driven complete their data and analytics projects on time and on budget. Our initial consultations are always free, and if we see a chance to work together, we'll then proceed. And if not, we'll gladly point you in the right direction. This includes data strategy, advanced data architecture, data engineering, and implementation. I encourage you to ask questions in the questions panel on your right, and we will get to them in the live Q&A at the end of the presentation. And if you have any problems, please reach out to me at remy@caserta.com. All right, now let's get started. Joe, the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Remy. Thanks for setting this up. So if everyone could see the screen, you'll notice that there is a brain on the screen. And that brain is divided into two halves. One half is human and one half is binary or robotic or machine. And I did that intentionally because data governance what it is it's an approach that attempts to take things that we're building on machines and have them integrate with humans. And there's, we've been trying to do this for many decades, and we've been getting gradually better. But I think 2020, all the things happening in 2020 is pivotal. But this, I think, we are actually hitting a very pivotal moment for operationalizing data governance and really integrating it into the fabric of the business based around new data platforms that were never really possible even just last year, right, with the innovation of cloud technologies and new nascent technologies that are available today that were never available before, and also very, very specific techniques that had time to mature around these new innovative products that we're going to share with you right now. This is just a part of a series that we've gone through over the past couple of months. I don't remember exactly when we started it, probably around July, I think we started our very first data governance series. And all of them are recorded, and we will share the link to each one of these in the last slide. A little bit of a carrot and stick to make you stay. So far, if you go to the link in the last slide, you'll find that we gave very, very specific practical experience and anecdotes on how to do things like data access and privacy and sovereignty, governing and harnessing and sharing metadata, ensuring data quality in modern data ecosystems, including data lakes and data warehouses on the cloud. Automating data and IT governance. We'll talk a little bit about that again today with the people part. master data management techniques for modern data platforms. And finally, today we're covering how to establish a data organization that actually allows you to execute and mature all of the things that we spoke about in the previous episodes of this series.
Great, thanks, Joe. So today what we do want to talk about is this data organization and how a data organization is so much bigger than just your data governance council and how it supports it. So we're going to talk about three main parts. What is a data organization? Who's a part of it? We're going to talk a little bit about how to right size structure one for your organization and the individuals versus roles full-time that need to be part of that organization. Then we're going to talk about the power that this data organization has in your organization and how they can be a catalyst to help encourage data literacy and data adoption across the organization. So we've got all that lined up. So Joe, I'll let you take us off.
All right, so let me talk a little bit about how the people fit into the data technology part. And so we have the tech part and the people part. And so, you know, when we are doing any technical solution around data, we have to come up with 5 different pieces of the workflow. And it starts off with understanding the different business use cases. So what are the problems we are actually trying to solve? And when, you know, a use case is always divided into 3 things. It's like, as some kind of individual, I need to create some kind of action so that I can accomplish some kind of goal, right? And then we fill in the people, the action, and the goal with all different types of business scenarios. And the most important thing to remember about use cases is the very first bit, which is the person. As a business person, as a risk analyst, as a data scientist, as a CEO, right? As a COO, we really want to understand the human being of the problems that we're trying to solve. And then that makes it much more easier. We should always picture the, you know, in your exercise, we should actually take pictures of the people whose problems we're trying to solve and actually hang up the pictures on the wall. And every time we go through every part of the exercise, of the entire workflow, we should say, are we actually solving her problem? Are we actually solving his problem? Are we actually solving their problem? And so we want to be able to say, okay, once we understand the use cases, then we want to go through, where's the data? How do we get the data? And then we start figuring out what, you know, once we understand what are the different silos of data, how do we get that data integrated? How do we figure out what's valuable, what's not valuable? So we do a series of data profiling, and we figure out how do we get the entire company to start sharing their data across the organization. Again, this is not a technical challenge. Data integration has been around for 50 years. Getting people to share their data and break down the silos and get rid of the fiefdoms within an organization of people like, don't take my data, right? Because data is power. And as data becomes more and more valuable through monetization, it becomes even more powerful. So getting people to let go and really understand that, you know, it takes a village to understand data, right? And if you try to do it on your own, you're doing 2 things. You're limiting yourself from the possibilities of all of the other data assets throughout the organization. And also you're limiting the rest of the organization that could really benefit from your data assets. So part of what we need to do throughout this whole process, tech, yeah, but we really need to understand the people, understand how the people think, what are they worried about, and how do we overcome their worries. And the rest of this presentation is really going to talk about really identifying a lot of those challenges from the people part and help you set up an organization to not only implement technology, but really implement the change management that's required in order to take a legacy enterprise and graduate it to become an analytics-driven enterprise. You know, once we do that, the tools and technology start to become pretty obvious. Integrating the technical part of it becomes pretty obvious. And then the last part, really affecting the culture, really affecting the organization. throughout the entire enterprise. That's the next major challenge, and that we're going to spend some time on doing that.
So Joe, interesting on your diagram, it starts, you've got 5 parts, and it starts with the people, the person, the use case, and then it ends in that culture and organization side. So it's balanced with people on both sides. If you go up and you Google data management lifecycle plans, you get diagrams like these. There's thousands of them out there. And what's interesting about them is that there's very little emphasis on the people side, on who you're doing it for, and then most importantly, how it's getting done. Who are the people involved in this piece? So I found it just very interesting that the reason that I think there are so many of these out there is, and why there are so many, is they don't work because they're only telling part of the story. The diagrams are fine in and of themselves, all good, but the story really is around the people side of it and how an organization can rally their teams, get the right roles, the right training to make the data management process happen, that transformation from the creation of a data point to where it's a useful piece of information for the business to use. And it's not about the data, it's about the people making it happen. So data, Joe, as you know, data persists really because the business needs it. If the business didn't need it, IT wouldn't go through the effort of acquiring it and managing it, storing it and procuring it. It would all just kind of fade away it would all just fade away off of the transactional system. But the business needs the data. And so IT puts a significant effort into pulling it together, but it can't be done alone. It's got to be a partnership. And that's where this data organization comes together. And there's got to be some structure around it to take the plan, to put it into action into a methodical and an organized way. So on our next slide, we look at how data governance fits in with the large organization. If you look on here, everyone understands corporate governance. Corporate governance has been around for years and years, and that's how basically most large corporations run. That's how their major decisions are made, is the framework they use for how they spend their money, how they allocate their resources. IT, same thing. In most large IT organizations, there's a fairly structured and organized IT governance process that again helps people understand what the guiding principles are, how decisions are made within IT, how resources and dollars are allocated. Data is no different in that concept. Data is, it flexes between the IT side and the business side and has that same critical component of needing to be organized, some guiding principles around how decisions are made, some standards put in place so that everybody understands how data can be moved through the organization and what the value of it can be and what it means. Joe, do you want to weigh in a little bit on this piece?
Yeah, I would just say that, it was very intentional the way we made this slide, and it's trying to illustrate that enterprise risk management, it's a three-legged stool. And, as you said, Aileen, corporate governance, very mature. IT governance, with corporate governance, legal counsel, it's part of the administration of any enterprise. Really understanding and keeping a company safe. All of the policies and procedures that corporate governance has is very mature. IT governance, also very mature. The governance of security, the governance of code repositories, version control of source code. A lot of the IT work has also been done for many years. IT governance has always been kind of the stepchild of the governance, tripod, right? Of the trifecta of of governance is, corporate, IT, and data. And, if we can achieve anything out of this webinar is to get data governance a little bit more respect, by its cohorts, because without it, especially nowadays when data is really at the core of every business, and especially in like financial institutions where a lot of regulatory compliance revolves around data governance, and and with data governance and all governance, right? When we talk about regulatory compliance, all of them, there's all different, there's Sarbanes-Oxley and, ISO 9000 and there's no shortage of different types of governing bodies that we need to comply to. But they all basically do the same thing. They all come down to three major things. Those three major things are: you need to be able to say what you do, you need to be able to do what you say, and you need to be able to prove it, right? So you know, saying what you do is all of the policies and procedures and the business metadata around your data. Doing what you say is operational metadata and technical metadata, and embedding the data governance into the fabric of your data platform, right? That's the only way you could really do what you say, right? If it's not baked in the platform from the ground up, it's not going to work. And then the last part is being able to prove it. So that is having a governing body that is very close to the data governance part, not only corporate and IT governance. And that requires a special staff that we're going to introduce to you right now. And the two technical parts that we want to be able to do is figure out, like, how do we, through metadata strategy, how do we disseminate the information about our data to all of the people, the governing bodies? And also, how do we persist the data in a very immutable way so that you can always prove without shadow of a doubt where your metrics came from, how you made your decisions, what were the variables that went into the models for you to actually drive some of your major business decisions. And that's all data governance, right? You can have the greatest corporate governance in the world, greatest IT governance in the world, but if you don't have the greatest data governance in the world, you're still going to keep getting dinged by the governing bodies. So it should have equal weight, equal importance, and also equal budget, which we'll talk about. I'll take a quick second for those of you new to data governance. Data governance has got to be one of the most ambiguous terms in the industry. So when we talk about data governance at Caserta and with our clients, we break it down into these 7 things, right? The organization, the metadata, the privacy and security, the data quality and monitoring, business process integration, master data management, and information lifecycle management. And we use these 7 components of data governance to create this series of operationalizing data governance. Well, you'll notice along the left-hand side that it's not a tech problem, it's not a process problem, it's a people, process, and tech problem. And unless you're really addressing all 3 for each of the 7 swim lanes, success is going to be challenging, right? So, we always like to talk about the tech part. After tech, we tend to go towards the process part, but now we're really going to drill in on the people part. And just very quickly, whenever we talk about data, we tend to go towards the shiny objects, right? Everybody likes to talk about AI and ML and data visualization and the cloud, but really none of this is possible without a sound data governance and data organization as an underlying body that supports all of these things and builds all of these things. And in the beginning, it may be done with consultants, but ultimately every organization should drive towards being self-sufficient with governing and maintaining your own data ecosystem. And that's going to require people. So here's why we think it's so important for the people part, and why we also think it should not necessarily be just an IT thing, right? It's a people thing across the entire organization.
Yeah, Joe, when I look at this, I think back to one time too many, working with clients and in my own organizations, where the IT team and business team weren't on the exact same page. Project moves forward and closes out, and IT and the PMO group are having their celebration party, and across the hall, the business team is frustrated that it took so long, and it's not what they expected. The data isn't in a format that they can use it easily. It's harder to analyze it. It's not integrated with the right pieces. The requirements change from the time they gave them till we deliver the project. There's all kinds of reasons why that disconnect happens. And what it creates and it perpetuates really is this us versus them mentality between IT and the business, which most of us have seen either from a client perspective or in a large organization. One of the things this data governance process and a data organization help do is they pull those two groups of people together who really have a common goal and help them understand what their goal is, helps them see the other side. So it's not an us versus them, it's a program that we're trying to accomplish, it's a business goal we're going to achieve. And it all sounds, it's a little bit of apple pie to make that happen. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow and methodical shift, but it needs a couple key pieces. We're going to talk about the roles that make that happen. And one of the first ones is leadership. You need really good, strong leadership that can bridge the gap between business and IT, pull together a common data team, and let that data lead be the one who pushes these pieces forward, who makes sure that projects are delivered that are meeting the business need and are being IT focused and using best of breed technologies and moving those pieces forward. So it takes, as Joe said, it takes a village, but it takes a village chief. So why don't we start a little bit with where that piece, that first role is. So on our next slide, we have just a little bit of history for a second here. In 2012, there were 12% of the organizations that were surveyed by, it was an HBR survey, 12% had staffed a chief data officer. Last year, in 2019, 68% of those organizations had appointed a chief data officer, a huge jump in just 7 short years. But interesting enough, over those 7 years, as the chief data officer role was created and implemented in these companies, over 80% of data governance projects that were started in those organizations had failed. So coincidence? I don't think so. The chief data officer, and we'll talk about what that role is so critical to an organization's ability to pull together their teams and have one cohesive vision that they're working on and bridge that gap between the two organizations. So a chief data officer, what is she, he? They're a senior executive, and this is very important. They're not typically, and most successfully, they're not part of IT. They're in the business side. Lots of organizations have their chief data officer who reports into the CEO, the COO, or a chief strategy officer, depending on how the corporate makeup is. But that's a critical role that they be at that senior level. And the reason for it being a chief data officer is that position then leaves them uniquely positioned in the organization to see strategically what all the business units are doing. This is a very strategic role who has, if it's done right, the capability to see where a company is bringing each individual and where they're headed as an organization from a next year, 5-year perspective. So being in that executive level conversations is very important for this role to succeed. One of the other things they need to do is they need to be an innovator. So they're not status quo people. These are the ones who are looking at where the marketing team is heading, where the chief digital officer is trying to take that group, and finding ways that data can support it and drive their missions even. So it's a very innovative role. They have to be the ones that are out in front, trying out new things, putting new ideas up, making those conversations happen. And to do that, they're also their change agents. They are never going to be the ones to say, here's how we did it last year. It's here's how someone else did it. Here's a new technology. Here's a new way for us to look at data, a new way for us to take the data and put it out there for our clients, for our customers. And they have to be influential. They're negotiators. Typically, a chief data officer, and Joe will talk about a little bit, has a staff of some perspective, depending on the company size. But their greatest strength is their ability to influence other chiefs across the organization to work together, to try something new, to move forward on a big project that shifts their data in a new way, incorporates new technology, brings on a new third-party vendor, a new data set. They're the ones that are thinking outside the box, and they have to be able to influence a large audience to make that happen. Best of breed chief data officers are coming from within either their company or the industry at least. They need to understand how the business works. Very important. Remember, they're on the business side, not IT. But they have to have technical acumen. They've got to understand how data works. They have to understand data pipelines, what it means to bring on a new data source, what it means to be moving things to the cloud, understand the new technologies. They're not technologists. They've got to be able to hold their own on the conversation with the architects, with the data scientists, with the CIO. It's a pretty robust, tough role. It's hard to find the perfect person.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible to find the perfect person. Right? This is a very tall order. This is taller than tall, right? And we actually created a visual to show what we think it takes in order to be a really effective CDO. And you know, if anyone who knows anything about the brain, not to say that we're experts, but I do think that, you know, different parts of the brain, different quadrants do different types of things. And, you know, you heard about people who are left side oriented or tend to be more creative, right side oriented tend to be a little bit more pragmatic. And, you know, what Aileen just rattled off is someone who needs to be analytics driven, be able to do data science, understand engineering, understand like business goals and revenue goals and monetization goals, be able to have a holistic vision and also be very, very detail oriented. And then also understand governance and process and compliance and you know, all of the rules and regulations around data. There's no single person that I have met yet to this day that can do all of these things. You know, and that's why it's a very, very, very challenging role. The other thing that's challenging that Aileen mentioned was where in the organization does the CDO roll up? And not only are all of these things, you know, monumental for a single person to do, it's impossible to do without proper budget, right? All of these things cost money. And without a proper budget allocated to accomplishing these goals, to ask any human being to be able to accomplish those goals are really just setting them up to fail, right? Which is why 80% of these initiatives fail, is because they're not properly funded and not properly staffed, right? So we really want to drive home that in order to have a CDO be effective and be successful and really take the business to the next level through data, it needs to be a little bit more thoughtful, and you need to take a divide and conquer approach. So when we think about, you know, the different personalities in different parts of the brain, the best way to divvy it up is with, you know, these 4 or 5 different roles. And these are suggestions, right? These are not rules. But we do think that we need to have some kind of data officer, some throat to choke in the organization for everything in and about your data. And that person, you know, we're not going to get hung up on titles, but, you know, some kind of data officer, right? Someone at the executive level, whether it's an EVP, an SVP, a VP, a director, whatever you want to call it, someone responsible for your data. Within the organization, the data organization also needs to have someone specifically dedicated to governance, because the strategy, the monetization, the analytics, all of that stuff, that is a very, very different part of the brain that thinks about governance. It thinks about policy, thinks about, you know, social ramifications of sharing data that should be private. You know, all of the gotchas from the governing bodies is very, very different personality than somebody says, hey, I have a new idea on how we can make money with our data, right? So we need to be able to understand what the different initiatives are and be able to divide and conquer them each. The other role that I think is very important that we often see overlooked is a dedicated data librarian. And we tend to think of this as in your data ecosystem, the goal, I think, of most organizations is to have a self-service data checkout, right? So you want to be able to have data assets, easily find your data assets, and be able to use your data assets. and consume them and either use them to create new data assets or just consume them to make business decisions. If we load up a data lake or load up a data warehouse or any kind of data ecosystem, and we don't have a dedicated data librarian to index all of the data, to define all of the data, to come up with a business glossary, data definitions, and a way to navigate towards that data and find it, and also a way to actually consume it, right? That, without that, it's impossible. You know, I like to use the analogy of like, you know, walking into the New York City Public Library, one of my favorite buildings in all of New York City, huge, massive, millions of books, right? Without, you know, is even archaic as the Dewey Decimal System is, right? It works, right? You can go find your book. And I think with today's technology, with search capabilities and metadata tagging capabilities, there's no reason for any enterprise to not have a fully mature index of all of your data, and it will be monitored and defined by a dedicated data librarian. And then finally, we have, you know, kind of on the side, but it's equally as important. You know, it would be great if we had dedicated data stewards. I have not seen that yet. And I don't really know if it's needed forever, right? I do think that if data initiatives and a brand new data ecosystem is new to you, I do think you should have dedicated data stewards, you know, at least like 80% of their job dedicated to it. But very quickly, as soon as the data definitions are defined with the help of the data librarian, the data steward can start, you know, winding down their dedication to stewardship and start getting back to their day job. Data scientists, we also have an aside because there's two kinds of thought here. The one is data science should be a centralized center of excellence, and others think that data scientists should be a proliferation throughout the organization of data scientists for each of the different parts of the business. And I'd say the decision on whether it should be central or not really depends on your culture, and it really depends on, do you have all of the other parts, right? If you have all of the other parts, if you have, you know, a data librarian and self-service data access and really sound data governance practice, you can have citizen data scientists throughout the organization. If you don't, right, if you really need to have a trusted set of users accessing your data because your data governance process is not fully matured, then you probably want to have your data science organization more centralized, more controlled, and more managed. Aileen, I don't know if you have anything to add on this one.
Yeah, I think, Joe, the balance here for many people that they struggle with is what's a full-time position versus a role that's part of somebody's, you know, day job. And I think you articulated well that the titles aren't the important thing here. It's much more about what they do and then the level of effort and really where you are in your data governance lifecycle. So, for example, you talked about the data governance lead, and that position, I would say, is one that is so critical to making a data governance program successful that is actually a full-time position. Where we've seen it fail, and Joe, I know you've seen this multiple times, is when that data governance lead is a part-time effort on somebody's day job. And then it doesn't get the time and attention, and it doesn't move forward. It's a tough role to be in. It's a very unique way of thinking that is different. It's very structured. And having that person only be able to dedicate 20, 30% of their time to it is a recipe for disaster. So that's when it's got to be its full-time role. The data librarian, same thing. It's a unique skill set, and you're right, Joe, often overlooked, but so critical to making this program sustainable. You can get things up and running, but if you don't have it documented, you lose the ability to keep it sustainable and for it to grow across the organization. I'm with you, data stewards. Most of the time they end up being a business analyst, a data analyst, and their data steward on the governance team part-time. Works out great. Scientists, a data scientist is a data scientist. That's a full-time position and role. And I think always will be a very unique skill set that's growing tremendously actually in this industry today. All right, so Joe, you talked about 5 pretty critical roles. We've said a couple times today that it really does take a village. The data organization, it's easy to get it confused with data governance council, and they're not the same thing. So a data organization is a group of people across the company. They're the ones who create, manage, curate, they monitor, they secure. And then just as importantly, the data organization includes people who explore and use the data. So it's those data scientists, it's your business analysts, it's all the way from IT, all the way through everyone who ever touches the data and uses it, does an analysis on it. It's large. And so data people, if you can create this properly, they're ubiquitous. They're all over the organization. It's not some people are data people and others aren't. And I think we've seen this change dramatically over time. When you look at kind of the boomers out there today, grew up, data was not readily available. Decisions were made based on experience, based on gut feel, based on conversations. And now there's this group of the next generation leaders coming up into corporate America who are not afraid to be labeled as data guys. They're data savvy. They've grown up with data in front of them. Half their classes in their computer and in college are computer-based classes. They're learning how to do statistical pieces that was never taught 10 years, 15 years ago. So there's a whole way of things are shifting. And with that culture shift of the individuals in the company, we need to help make sure that that's changing on how data is perceived across the organization. So you don't have data people and business people. You have business people who understand data at varying levels, but that data organization gives us the opportunity to bring some of those people together who traditionally haven't had a whole lot of conversations and really kind of cross-pollinate their knowledge on what's happening from a data structure, architecture perspective and how it's being used. When those two teams understand what the other's trying to accomplish, a lot more gets done right the first time. So our next slide, Joe, we talk a little bit about this village that we've referred to a couple times. So we put together, and this would be, let's just call it a sort of an average of multiple organizations we've seen. Down on your axis, we have business acumen. And then up on the Y, we've got data-related technical skills. So not all technical skills, just those that pertain to managing data. And then the blue bubbles represent an analytical or statistical skill. So again, the bigger bubble, the more analytical or statistical skills that role should have. So you see, we've got, I don't know, there's probably 15 or so roles that we put up here. And if you look, just start in the bottom left, and Joe, if you just hit the forward button for me, then, so I want to talk about a couple things. So one are who these roles are, and then the red arrows represent an opportunity for us as data professionals to pull these roles forward. So let's start bottom left, citizens. These are your knowledge workers across the organization who are typical receivers of data. They are typically understand their business, their unit. They're low on the data skill set perspective, low on analytical skills. This is a tremendous opportunity to educate this team a little bit more, get them a little more savvy on what that data is they're looking at. They have a KPI that shows up on the home screen of the intranet every day. So they really understand where it comes from and understand what it means to the business. So data adoption, data literacy isn't just technical skills, it's really understanding where that data comes from. So it's a little bit of technology, but really understanding what that data means. So the more people in your organization get it, who understand what that data is, what these company KPIs are, the better they can participate in that process. Then look at all the way top left, the data engineers. In many organizations, data engineers are your top-notch technical guys from a data perspective. They know new technologies, they're watching all the changes that are happening out in the marketplace. They understand the data coming in. They're not typically as well versed in how their company is running, how the company is moving forward the next year, what their big strategic goals are. They can tend to be a little bit myopic in their view of the world. Educating the data engineers a little bit more on the project they're working on, the why they're doing something, helps them make better decisions and helps them feel a little bit more engaged in the work that they're doing. So your data organization has a lot of opportunity to keep moving these pieces up and to the right. Now, everybody does not belong all in the strategic and having data technical skill set, but there's an opportunity to move a lot of these roles along. Let me just touch on a couple others that we didn't mention as part of this data organization. So we have our BI power users, very important ones who can pull together the data into a consumable format. They're often they become sort of guides to the business on what data is available to them, what their reports could look like. Very, very beneficial. Those roles, depending on the organization, tend to fall within the IT realm and are part of the IT team, but have a very close relationship with the data analysts and the business analysts on the business side. So a little more in the technical realm, but could use a little bit more understanding of where the business is going. You look at your chief data officer. So we have, chief digital. I've got that role on there. We hadn't mentioned them earlier. Your chief data officer, we talked about, is kind of the head of this data organization. The critical relationship in here is the chief digital officer. So any organization that's going through a digital transformation process, that chief digital role is so key, and their ability to communicate with, get support from, and help drive the data program is key. So those two, the chief data officer and chief digital officer, in a good transformation program are working hand in hand. They're supporting each other. They're coming up with new ideas together. They're leading that organization forward. So that's kind of the big picture on where these fit in. And I think we touched upon really those 5 critical ones that Joe talked about and which ones are really important if they be full-time. Joe, anything else you want to add on this?
Just that, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of roles, and figuring out how to get everybody to work together is always a challenge, right? So what we did is we took a crack at figuring that out for you. So with every engagement at Caserta, what we do is we encourage our clients to use this type of agile methodology. So on the top left-hand corner, you look at the data organization of the key roles that we recommend that be full-time positions. So the data governance coordinator, the data librarians, data stewards may or may not be full-time. We also have the IT organization also have a seat at the table. The project managers, the PMO, project management office, also have a seat at the table. And then the data scientists, right? And everybody comes in as equals, including the business. So if we look at the orange and the light blue, the vertical business areas usually dedicates a single business owner, could be a set of business owners. And they are at the table as part of the project team. And they're included with the daily stand-ups and making sure we're touching, all of the different parts of the organization all the time under the oversight of a chief data officer who's ultimately responsible for every data program within an organization. Anything to add, Aileen?
No, I think just on the next slide, Joe, what's interesting is that makes it show, right, that's obvious. We show all together how you pull everyone together, the team works. And then it just begs the question, why is it so hard? So, right? So, right, and we've talked about this multiple times. So why is it so hard? Data governance is difficult until you can get that diagram pulled together, until you've got those teams working together. So what Joe showed you was the right way to do it and not what most of us are doing today. So that piece of nirvana that's where we all need to drive towards. And at Caserta, one of the things we do well is help put those organizations together and pull those right teams together and get those data initiatives kicked off with the right people in the right room, brainstorming together, coming up with a solution, everyone understanding what the problem is, knowing where we're driving. It makes a tremendous difference. And one of the reasons, Joe, as we've discussed, that data governance still can be so hard is that sometimes it gets ahead of itself. So if you're trying to put data governance protocols and structures in your framework in place, and your organization isn't ready to use the data yet, you end up putting rules in place, and then it's making it hard to get that data program pushed forward. Or conversely, you're throwing data out there, it's not been fully vetted, and it's got quality control issues, and then the business loses trust on it. So a lot of times the struggle is that we're not working together. We're putting one before the other, and they really have to move together. Data governance and data adoption have to kind of lockstep together and keep moving forward. A little bit of freedom of the data out there, a little bit of controls to make sure it's working right. Next step forward. It's a slow and a fairly methodical process. And that diagram you showed, Joe, with all the teams coming together is the only way to make that happen. That's what takes the difficult piece out of data governance, is making them work together.
Yeah, this slide that we're looking at now is really the culmination of the entire Operationalizing Data Governance series. You know, it starts with data, you know, having the data governance baked into the fabric of your technical platform, having a data quality framework. But then it also gets into aligning the business and IT, which is really about the people. And without that, you know, if it's done separately, then it's always, the business always feels like they're just waiting around for IT to do something, and it just never works. That's why it has to be a team effort. And, you know, and whenever you want to change technology, right, it's fairly simple, right? You do a little bit of diligence, you do a little bit of research, maybe you do some POCs, you make a decision, and you build it, and it's done. Maybe you hire consulting firms to help you, maybe you figure it out yourself, maybe you do it on the side, maybe you do it as a replacement, but ultimately it gets done. The people part is different, right? Getting people to change isn't as easy as like, okay, here's the new way of doing it, everybody hop on board, right? It's a process. You know, change is two things always, even if it's change for the better, right? You're asking somebody to give something up, and you're asking somebody to learn something new. And even if the ultimate end result is so much better than what they were doing before, you're still asking somebody to give something up. And whenever you give anything up, there is a certain level of grieving that the brain has to go through in order to let it go. And so what we did is we actually came up with a very, very specific, deliberate process to get people through, letting go of what they've been doing and getting them to adopt what is new. And it's a 4-step process. And so, Aileen, I don't know if you want to talk about this one. All right, Cam.
Go ahead, Joe.
So the 4-step process is really making it known throughout the organization, what is it you're doing and why are you doing it? And come up with a very concrete definition on the value of what it is you're doing, and then start thinking about how do you communicate that throughout the entire enterprise. All of the people whose life you think is going to change, not who is going to make the business better, right? Think about the people. Whose life are you going to affect with this change? And come up with a very deliberate communication strategy and getting people to understand what it is you're doing, what's the so what to them, and how do you get them engaged? And once you do that, then you have to start figuring out, okay, who are the people that really need special attention? Who are the people through your organization that need to be retrained, reskilled, maybe replaced, maybe repurposed, and start coming up with a process in order to do all of those things. And then after that, really embedded in your culture. Like, it is a paradigm shift that the organization is going along in unison to go from being a legacy, conventional wisdom run company to being a technology, data-driven, analytics-driven organization. And it's different. And again, we need to make sure that everybody really understands it. We've actually coached some of our clients to rewrite their mission statement, because it's that important to let the entire organization, every single employee know it's that important. We are rewriting our mission as a company to let it be known that analytics is now at the core of our business. And we are going to use analytics to drive every part of our business, which isn't easy, right? So there's a very, very specific technique that comes with this. And we did not invent this, by the way. This was created by a change management expert named Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin came up with this concept of force field analysis. And with force field analysis, it's an engagement that is typically done by consultants because consultants don't have a dog in the fight. We have no political ties throughout the organization. We are here just to be mediators, to figure out, to peel back the layers of the onion, to figure out what's driving the change in the organization, talk to all of the employees throughout the organization, understand why is there any resistance whatsoever. And maybe there's not, and maybe it's a very short engagement. But maybe as we start to speak to different people throughout the organization, we start understanding there's different personas that need to be addressed very, very specifically. And usually throughout any organization, there's usually 4 to 6 types of personas, and they're all different, so I'm not going to try to categorize them for you. But for each set of personas, we come up with a list of forces of resistance, and then we have to attack each one of those resistances so that we can implement this change. And that is a process that is typically done by an outside consultancy, and it does move the needle in the organization. You know, it comes to, you can create the greatest engine in the world, but unless you get people to be comfortable behind the wheel of the car, they're never going to drive it. And this is all about getting people to be comfortable behind the wheel of the car. Eileen?
Yeah, Joe, I think you know, our next slide talks a lot about this. So we talk about this change and the challenge with it. And so a little bit of tongue in cheek, but at Casera, we call this data therapy. It's not easy, it's not trivial, and it can't be overlooked. This process to understand what's holding people back, and the process to understand what's driving this forward, and how do we put together a training program, an adoption program that meets those needs, that takes those fears that are either spoken or not spoken, but persist out there, and alleviate them. It's through communication, and it's these persona-based training programs we talked about with Jill. But it's a process that we go through with our clients to help them it's cathartic to get all this out. What's the challenge? What's holding us back? And it's a fun group of workshops that pull all this information out, and then we build a plan on how to get the data utilization moving across the organization, how to remove those obstacles, and how to take really this company to the next level with data as one of the main stimulators for that process. And it's actually it's a very engaging, exciting process to go through. We spend a lot of time making sure our clients have their own coaches internally, but it's to Joe's point, it's not something that's done well internally. It requires some outside consultancy for it. Somebody who really is just that neutral referee to help move these pieces forward and is non-emotional about any of the changes that are happening, and can really just be that force, that honest feedback on where that team is going and what's going to hold them back.
Yeah. And we very intentionally call this therapy and not education and not training, right? You're not going to solve your data adoption challenge by sending in everybody to Tableau school or everybody to Snowflake school, right? This is really getting people not to learn a new technology, but it's actually getting people to change the way they think, right? Because old thoughts breeds old results. And until you start changing the way people think about data, you can have the greatest data platform, greatest data ecosystem, greatest data fabric, whatever tech term you want to use. It's not going to work unless you have a very deliberate data adoption program, which takes therapy. Again, getting people to go through that grieving process of losing something that they know, and teaching them how to embrace something new.
And then really that takes you to, back in your data organization journey. So we talked a lot about the data governance process and the structures that are needed for that. And there's 5 webinars that take you through some of those details. And we talked about the importance of our data team being able to pull all that together. So part of that process that we talked about today, Joe and I, is keeping this data organization moving forward with the way that the company is moving forward. And that requires a little bit of therapy, a lot of communication and conversation to make sure that there's a plan in place to move forward. And it's something that at Concerta we have a data adoption practice, because it is something that is so critical to an organization's ability to move forward. It is about change management, and it's a very specific, very discrete approach to looking at how people are changing the way they work and their understanding of why they're changing and their understanding of how they're moving their part of the company process to move it forward. It's a very customized approach that is needed. Every company is different. There are different obstacles. There are different forces pushing it forward. Personas are different. The types of training and education that are needed vary from one place to another. And then I think just as important in this whole process as you determine your next steps is making sure along the way you're kind of spreading this knowledge out, and there are more and more people within the organization, we call them coaches, that are available to help kind of move this data movement to the next step.
Yep, great. So we will wrap up now. I will just end with, this is a journey. This is not a destination. Since, data is never finished. As long as you're in business, you'll be creating new data. So, this is going to be an evergreen process that lives with your organization. So it's worth investing in getting it done right, having a really good foundation, and have a sound data governance organization and a data organization established. And then you can grow upon it slowly over time as you mature. With that, there's obvious links here. The Data Gov Now link will give you every episode of the series, and this one will be available in a couple of days as well. And if there's any questions about anything we said, positive, negative, or just a comment, feel free to reach out to Aileen or I directly. Our emails are here. And with that, I will turn it over to Remy.
Joe, Aileen, that was excellent. Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. We're now going to go over to Q&A. And we have a few questions already. And if you have any more questions to ask, please enter them in the questions panel on your right. So let's pick a good one. Okay. We've had a data governance strategy from an external consulting firm from about 2 years ago, but we were never able to implement it. Then last year we merged with a new company, and now we're back at the drawing board. How would you suggest we jumpstart our data governance program?
Joe, you want to take that?
I'll start, and then you can correct me.
Yeah.
But I think if you spend 2 years on anything, you're obligated to figure out why it didn't work. And I'm sure that there's some golden nuggets in there. And I'm sure that there's a lot of fluff in there, right? One of the drawbacks of some of the very large consulting firms is they can scale because they do a lot of rinse and repeating. And, a lot of the very large consultancies, they walk in with the answer before they even start talking to you. And then when they present it to you, it has nothing to do with you, right? So really look in there. There might be some golden nuggets and figure out what worked and what didn't work. If you were to hire a more boutique niche consulting firm like Concerta, or attempt to do it yourself, openly share what you have, and we'll help you figure out, where's the meat, and where's the fluff. And rather than starting from scratch, I think after a 2-year investment, I think there is something to be learned from that. And, it could be that it's a very sound recommendation and a very sound outline for a data governance program. And the reason it didn't work is because you didn't address the culture and you didn't use the change management process. And it could be that we take everything that the prior consulting firm gave verbatim, and it's perfect, and we just apply it through the deliberate data adoption program. And that may that may be effective. Aileen?
Yeah, Joe, I was going to say the same thing. If you've been working on it for 2 years, if there were some pieces to it that were starting to work, it's probably about the people. And if you've just gone through a merger, you've got now new personalities, you've got a new corporate structure in place. So I think it's a little bit more of the take a step back, look at who's involved, and then find that one piece that's really critical to move forward on and focus there. And that's where you start putting your data governance structure in place. Make it about a business initiative. So you're solving a business problem, not solving data governance, solve a business problem with data governance. And that will help move you forward the next step.
You don't forget that process. Start with the use cases, right? And then figure out how to affect culture to satisfy.
People on both ends. Yep.
It's the people, not the tech.
That's right.
We're going to move on to our next question. You mentioned citizen data scientists being key. This has long been a buzzword in our company, but no one has ever owned this. What do you see other companies doing that you work with, especially now that everyone is remote?
I think in order to have an effective citizen data science operation, we need to stop worrying about data, right? It's like, you know, if you think about money, right, you think about the value of the money in aggregate. You don't think about how many 5s do I have? How many 10s do I have? How many 20s do I have? How much change do I have? Where'd that change come from? Like, is it valid, right? All of that starts to go away after a while, after you become used to it. And I think once you have data governance baked into your operation as an enterprise, you'll start worrying about your data less and start using it more. And once you can easily find your data, you trust your data, it's credible, and access to it is simplistic, then only then can citizen data scientists become a real thing. If you have a citizen, you know, the term citizen data scientist, but you don't do any of the foundational work around operationalizing your data governance, again, you're setting those people up to fail, right? Because every single data initiative is going to be a treasure hunt, and they're going to be looking and searching and wasting time, and they're not going to be effective. And in order to make them effective, we need to be able to operationalize the entire ecosystem with data governance baked into the fabric, and have a full support team to support it, dedicated.
Aileen, did you want to chime in or add anything?
Yeah, look, Joe's right. The more you think about data as a typical business person, the more you know it's a problem. So data in large parts, outside of those in core to making data move through the organization and the analysts and scientists type, it needs to not be part of the conversation. It needs to just be a thing that's there. People don't talk about the air conditioning anymore because we just all have it. It's just a thing. It works every day. There's not a conversation. Data needs to move to that place, so that it's not a conversation from a typical business person's perspective. It will always be for those who are responsible for it. Same as the HVAC is always somebody's responsibility. But it needs to come out of the daily conversation. And it's not the data. It's not the data points. It's not the, as Joe said, the change. It's understanding what it turns into, and that's the information. It's a KPI. It's a metric that we're using. It's a way to measure our company. And that's where the data governance program will take you to, where data isn't a conversation of, do I trust this thing? It becomes more, how do I use this to be better?
It's an excellent point. All right, we have time for one more question. And everyone else, you can still ask your questions in the question panel, and I will get back to you with an answer from our presenters. The last question is, all right, these are a lot of roles to hire, exclamation point. What would you say are the most important roles to hire first?
Okay, so I'll start that one. One, don't hire all these roles at once. Definitely not the way to go. You need a leader. So if your organization is one that is in a position where they can bring in a chief data officer, that is a key piece, because that will be a couple of things. One, the person who can help drive a budget. They'll be at that senior level. They'll help drive the benefit, the purpose for it. They're a voice in the executive office to help move the data program forward. So that's great. Otherwise, a lot of these, Remy, they can start off as part-time. So a business analyst, often they have another role they're working on in their business, and they do some analysis and they're working on the BI tool. Data analysts often are in the IT department. They're a modeler, they're an analyst, they work on a couple different things. So some of these are just roles. The key ones to hire, if you're moving into a data governance program, your data officer, whether it's a chief data officer, but somewhere in that senior position, and then someone who's in charge of data governance. If data governance is something you're going to move forward on, your company's really using data, having someone who can make sure that structure is in place, that's what I would put some priority on. Joe, your opinion?
Yeah, the top three are data officers, someone to come up with the vision and the strategy on how data is going to drive the business. And then the data governance officer, right? Someone who's going to be responsible for keeping the company safe as far as their data assets. And then the third one is the librarian. The librarian is the one who is going to make all of the data accessible to the entire organization through a data catalog, through a business glossary, data dictionary, and such. And then if you don't already have it, a data science, the chief data scientist or data science organization. That without that one, you really don't need the other three, right? Because the whole goal of this is to data driven is, that's, to me, data driven is kind of like 1990s. The thing that we want to do is become analytics driven, right? We want to Amazonize your business, right? And make it so that, and what's so special about Amazon? What Amazon does is they have their business applications driven by data analytics, right? Every time you do an interaction with Amazon, it is constantly learning about your persona and about your behavior patterns. And it's customizing those screens and your interactions and product offerings every single time you make a click, right? And if you could do that with your organization, that's the goal, right? Is to really think about your audience. Your audience probably are going to start, the boomers are going to start winding down, and the millennials and the Gen Zers are going to start winding up. Millennials, Gen Zers, they don't have time to deal with a business that doesn't understand them as a human being. And the only way for you to understand a person's behavior patterns and needs and expectations is through data analytics. And if you don't have data analytics as the foundation to your business applications, you're going to fail. And the only way to get that interaction is to have a data scientist or a team of data scientists building the insights that drive your applications.
All right, that's excellent. Guys, thank you so much. A quick announcement before we finish. Aileen is going to be doing an upcoming webinar on how to gain a customer 360 view. She'll be talking about the opportunities, challenges, and some tips and tricks to get it off the ground running. Guys, thank you so much, and tune in for our next episode.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Remy.